The idea that you have control over your life is completely illusory. You don't make your heart beat. We train our children, we condition people to believe that they can control their lives. And that's just, you live in an environment you can't control, and you have a brain that's producing thoughts you can't control. Get rid of the idea that you have any agency over your life whatsoever, because the reality is you don't. And if you really want to understand, or at least get closer to understanding what it means to be an actual human having a human experience, at some point in your life, have a mystical experience. And you can get there without psychedelics. There's some people, because they're schizophrenic, they shouldn't do psychedelics. You can get there. Stan Grof invented, I believe it was holotropic breath work, because he couldn't take LSD. I think at some point, everyone in their life should have a mystical experience, but done in a way that they're safe, they're ready, they're older. I think once the veil of control is lifted, we're then free to really live the lives we were meant to live.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Psychedelic Conversations. We have Andrew Weisse in the house. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Susan. I'm happy to be here.
Great to have you. Just to give a bit of a context, your background for our listeners, I'm just going to read a few lines of your bio, but as always, we'll add it to the show notes for all our listeners if they wanted to connect with you and find out a little bit more about your work. So you are a former tech executive turned psychedelic advocate and writer. After a successful career in technology, now explores the potential of psychedelics through a weekly blog, blending rigorous analysis and personal insights driven by personal experiences of loss and healing. Andrew aims to bridge the gap between scientific research and public understanding, promoting a well-informed and compassionate approach to psychedelic studies. Thank you so much for doing this work, Andrew.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So what brings you to this space? My favorite question to all our guests, what brings you to the space?
Sure. It started with a great loss. My sister had unexpectedly passed away in 2014. I spent the next several months and years embarking on a bunch of healing modalities to repair and move on from that loss. All of them had their benefits. Fitness. I relocated from New York City to Los Angeles, but I still lacked a level of agency over the grief that I was experiencing. And in this kind of serendipitous way, a partner at the time had gifted me Michael Pollan's now very popular book, How to Change Your Mind. That would have been like winter 2019. I read that book, was fascinated. Like many people, my association up until that point with psychedelics was like, something you do in college, a way to, have fun. I had no idea that they had this kind of medicinal and this therapeutic and healing component to them. And then a few months after reading that book, a friend of mine mentioned she was going to a psychedelic ceremony. I was kind of curious, and I went, not knowing what particular psychedelic was going to be used that day. But I found out when I was there, it was the Toad or Bufo or 5-MeO DMT. So I skipped to the highest level of the video game, Susan. I went right to the transcendence, had a mystical experience, and that catalyzed this kind of lifelong endeavor into this world. And since then, I've sat with many psychedelics and been writing about these experiences and a wide array of topics related. So that's my origin story.
Thank you so much for sharing. So what are you seeing that's happening at the moment, the current wave of the psychedelic movement? What are your observations? General observation, but we can go into it in detail. And also we can also talk about, let's say, maybe the imminent harm or some of the harm reduction stuff, or at least maybe misconceptions, miseducation, misunderstanding, because that's kind of what I like to lean in more in these conversations, just because I think from my observation, I think there is maybe promotion going on indirectly, or maybe it is loudly, but I feel like it's always authentic to talk about all aspects of psychedelics. So I would love to hear your observations, what's happening right now in this space.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, and one I write about a lot and I think about a lot. I think I think it depends how we frame it, right? Like I come at this from a few different angles, like a personal, the individual level, societal, cultural, and then the political, governmental. And I think there's in like the Venn diagram, there's areas they all overlap and touch each other. But just to kind of answer the question on a linearly, starting on the individual level, this movement I think has been incredibly beneficial for so many people I've spoken to. Um, as a healing modality, for sure, almost all of us at some point in our lives are going to deal with loss. The magnitude might vary, but loss is inevitable. And whether it's psilocybin or MDMA or ketamine, the fact that people now have a route to heal, and really kind of go into the pain and feel the pain, as opposed to the traditional mechanism of like drinking or even things like just filling up your calendar and kind of avoiding and suppressing the pain, which anyone that's had a loss knows is not that's a pretty unwinnable strategy. But also just as like a source of recreation. I'm talking more about like lesser potent psychedelics, but couples getting together and having low doses of mushrooms and connecting on a way that they could never have imagined. The same thing goes with MDMA. So individually, I see this as an incredibly positive movement from the people I speak to. Culturally, I think what we're seeing is a kind of pent up demand for these medicines. And I think there's a few drivers of this. One, I'm based here in the States, in Austin, Texas, and we have a massive issue with things like anxiety, depression. We've been in several wars. We have soldiers, veterans that come back with PTSD, and we have neglected the care of these individuals. Many of them, it's awful, but they kill themselves while waiting to get an appointment because it takes months and months to see a doctor. And what we now know from tons of tests is that psychedelics, psilocybin, ketamine, MDMA can do wonders for folks with PTSD. And so I think the culture is seeing a lot of people struggling. We have this modality that works. And they are now kind of demanding action. And I think the third tier of this question is the political / the government. And I think that's an area where I tend to be a little bit more contrarian than most. An example of this is like in early June, we're going to see the first MDMA FDA approved study being done. And this is being lauded and celebrated in the psychedelic community. I kind of come at it from a different angle, where I struggle to celebrate the state granting back sovereignty over our consciousness to the individual. I think there should be absolutely laws, and we can talk a lot about harm reduction and age limits and ways that these medicines can have a resurgence in a way that helps people and doesn't do more harm than good, because there are risks unequivocally. But I guess I struggle a little bit with the notion of like it gets down to like first principles thinking and like, what do you believe the role of the state is? And I don't believe it is to tell consenting adults with free will what medicines they can and cannot take to heal or to enjoy pleasure or to whatever their objective is. So happy to speak more about that. But that's kind of how I see like the macro elements of the movement.
Yes, that's really helpful and valuable.
Sure.
I know, like I'm of course from the UK, and there is a lot more kind of reserved approach, you can imagine. But I am also connected with a lot of people in the US, and they are desperately really want to bring these medicines into the mainstream. And there's a real hard work that's been undertaken at the moment. There are loads of organizations I'm sure you're aware of. They're really bringing the education, and you're doing this with your blog. I really appreciate that. I think one of the reasons we are also having this conversation, I really believe that education is going to be the one. I came into it very late. I grew up in the UK, but I always said to people say to me, how long, you're in this space? And I'm like, not that long if you think about it, only a decade or so. But it's almost like I grew up in the UK, but I never knew about psychedelics. I must have lived under a rock. I don't know. So I came to it very late, and but when I did, and I came from, of course, from a therapeutic angle, it's easy for me to see the benefits because I don't know much about the history and the politics and the war on drugs, and some of our elders talk about it and they experienced it, like Dr. James Fadiman, for example, and Stan Grof and all and similar elders. So I don't really have that experience, or I can't even connect to that feeling, but they get really emotional about it, and they get really also excited. When I speak to Dr. James Fadiman, for example, he is absolutely excited that the young people are really stepping up, like someone like you, and he sees us, like, you will be carrying the flag, and you'll be doing your citizen science, and you'll be bringing the education, which is the critical piece, I think, and slowly, hopefully, bring more of this into the mainstream. That my intention, at least, is to shape through education and science. I don't know what your thoughts are. I know that in some of our friends in the space, they are lean more into the church and the sacrament and the spiritual approaches and indigenous, for example. But I think in the West, we definitely need the education, the science, because science does kill stigma, right? So I feel like we're finally starting to do that now. I feel like it's going in the right direction. Quite optimistic, as you can see. And I know that I hear from a lot of people that, oh, no, it's not going really well. People are being re-traumatized, and which is also true, right? So I'm sure you are in those kind of conversations. Do you find yourself in those conversations too?
Oh, absolutely. I would love to say just something on that because I think you said something that's incredibly salient that I agree with around education. And we have the counterfactual. We have a case study of how not to do this and how not to roll out these medicines in a systemic cultural way, which is the initial psychedelic movement of the 60s and 70s, when you had folks like Leary and Ken Kesey and saying, like, tune in, drop out. And what ended up happening was people completely misused these medicines. They thought they were a way to, like, and it was also, part of this was exacerbated by the profile of the person taking them was probably 19, 20 years old. This is an age where you're, resisting authority, and you are, individuating for the first time in your life. And so when a well-spoken elder, talks about these mystical experiences and LSD and how you can just kind of, unmoor yourself from society, that sounds like a really cool message. And obviously that's not a sustainable one, and that's not what we want to have happen. So we have the counterfactual of what happens when we miseducate or undereducate what these medicines are all about, and it doesn't look pretty. And so I think this is a kind of a second opportunity to get it right. In terms of the bad experiences and the retry, yeah, I've spoken to a lot of people, expert facilitators who say how something like a 5-MeO DMT can cause PTSD. So whereas, obviously that we know that psychedelics can be a cure for PTSD if done with a charlatan without the right, preparation in the wrong set and setting, this can create, not only emotional pain, but also things like serotonin syndrome. So I think we have to be aware of this. And I think there are common sense ways to mitigate these things from happening. But the last thought I'd have on that is it is a little bit like the Yelp review. If a restaurant has 100 good reviews and one bad, what's going to go, viral is that one really bad review. So and the news and Twitter and what, these different spaces will pick up on the story of someone that had a traumatic experience, on a psychedelic, and that will go viral. That will get clicks and views more than, oh, hey, like, I healed from the loss of my parent, or whatever the case may be. So I think that's something just to take into consideration. But yeah, I certainly align with your point about education.
Yeah, totally. I mean, look, mean, I'm easily in the category of therapeutic clinical. Well, not so much clinician, but yeah, I do value. I need to know what I'm getting myself into, and I feel like we need to also provide this platforms for people to also make that choice for themselves, right? Because it's a very huge, big experience. These medicines, they're not something that we can underestimate. So that being said, would you like to share some of your experience with the medicine? I'm not experienced with the Bufo, so So I'm not really sure. Is this Bufo alvaris or the synthetic?
Yes.
Or is the frog medicine?
Yeah, I initially sat with Bufo alvaris, although now, after speaking to a bunch of facilitators, I will opt for the synthetic 5-MeO DMT. There's a bunch of reasons why. The most obvious of which being is it's hard to calibrate how much of 5-MeO DMT is going in when you just smoke the toad medicine. But yes, that's what I was referring to in terms of my first mystical experience.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
And is there a harm for the frogs? Because I'm
Yeah.
hearing stories as well.
There is not a harm in the extraction method. There is a harm in now that the cartels are getting involved and trying to steal as many toads as possible and doing this in an irresponsible way. So yes, the future of 5-MeO DMT is certainly going to be synthetic, and that's a good thing.
Do you, how is it? Do you know the process of how do they make the synthetic version? Do you have a idea?
I'm not overly sophisticated in the mechanics behind it, but it's still illegal here in the US, but down in Mexico, I have two friends, Victoria and Joel, for example. They run a 5-MeO DMT center, and it's extracted. It was actually made synthetically before we even ever knew it existed in nature, which is kind of a very interesting part of psychedelic history. But yeah, I don't know like the mechanics that go behind it. That's a little bit probably over my purview.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love what Joel and Victoria is bringing to the world. They are our returning guests, and I continually want
Awesome.
to continue to speak with them. Yeah, they really are pioneering, and
Yeah.
the education part as well. So
Yeah.
I agree. And what is samadhi? Because I know you have an experience. What is it? I'm not sure.
Yeah, most people don't. It's an obscure psychedelic, and I can give you a little bit of the backstory because it's actually a pretty fascinating one. But samadhi is the same molecules as ayahuasca, DMT combined with MAOI inhibitors that slow down the breakdown of DMT. There is a little known idea, theory, I don't know what you want to label it, that folks should opt for the plant that's kind of native to the ecosystem that they live in. And this is bad news for the charlatans doing ayahuasca ceremonies in Brooklyn, New York, for example. They're not really doing Aya. And I'm someone from the Northern Hemisphere. I was in Mexico with a trusted facilitator who's become a friend of mine, and he does samadhi journey ceremonies, and I did one with him. And it was one of the most profound, beautiful, intense, all of the attributes that you would hear someone discuss in terms of an ayahuasca journey. It was a truth serum. I'd never really, I think, up until that point, understood who I am, why I make the decisions that I make. And samadhi has this beautiful way of gifting you this information where it's not sanitized, but it's non-judgmental. It's almost kind of like, hey, here's your life and every decision that you've made. And here it is in a non-judgmental way for you to then go and do the integration work to kind of decipher, maybe why you're making these certain decisions and are they serving you in the long run, and who is really you. And so samadhi is popular in Mexico in the Northern Hemisphere. But I think ayahuasca became this common household name because a few celebrities did it, talked about their experience, and that's how it kind of got into the public conversation. But I highly recommend for someone that's ready to transcend, heading down to Mexico and doing a samadhi journey with a guide, with a facilitator, because it is one that is incredibly potent and should not be. You shouldn't just walk into this lazily. There's a lot of prep work that needs to be done.
Yeah, totally. And I guess probably there are many. It's like a rainbow. There's so many medicines out there we're probably not aware of.
Yes.
And the most popular one is, of course, ayahuasca. I think it's mainstream. So I have an indigenous teacher. She says she calls it ayahuasca tourism.
Yeah.
And one of her favorite, conversations that she likes to have is that she always says, you guys in the West think that, over here in Peru, we're just kind of sitting in this Zen, beautiful, intentional ways of like continually drinking ayahuasca. She says it's not the case at all. Like, actually, the healing potential of ayahuasca was something that discovered over the years for them. Very early times. mostly people used it to do spells and magic and to harm each other, to be honest. I know that's the history of ayahuasca in most tribes, and then eventually evolved like everything does, and then it became a medicine to help people.
Wow.
So I know it's very profound because we don't know any of these indigenous. I'm not an indigenous person. I don't have that background. And when I hear this, it's really eye-opening, so that
Mhm.
we get to hear these stories from real people out there coming
Yeah.
from that history, right? They have elders that carry these stories, and they're also in the middle of all of it. So it's very important. So is samadhi purgative, or is it? You said it's similar to ayahuasca, so there's a lot of purging, or how does it work?
Yeah, it certainly can be. You fast the day of, and something actually your question catalyzed something that happened during the experience, that I think is really interesting and worth sharing. At some point, I was kind of, I was in another dimension, clearly an altered state of consciousness. I tend to, whether it's Bufo or Samadhi or DMT, I tend to always end up in these kind of very digital desert looking landscapes. I don't know, for whatever reason, these things are ineffable, but that's where I end up. A lot of Native American, and I have a little bit of Cree tribe in my bloodline. Perhaps that's the derivation of this, but and I'm kind of soaring through this, there's all these Native Americans. I'm in this desert with like digital cacti, almost kind of looks like they could have been from a video game. And when I would think about someone in my life that maybe I wasn't sure of, a person I had dated, a friend, whatever the case may be, the realm that I was in would start like almost like violently shaking and catalyze a purge. I couldn't quite fully purge because I didn't have anything in my stomach, and then if I was able to quickly shift my consciousness to someone in my life that I love or I enjoy, a longtime friend, whatever the case may be, it would smooth out and everything would go back to like this kind of beautiful, peaceful texture of reality I'd never seen. And obviously, to me, the takeaway was Samadhi was gifting me the lesson of like, hey, these are the people that are really important to keep in your life, and these people probably aren't serving you for whatever reason. So yes, it can certainly catalyze purging. Fasting helps there, but yeah, that's going to happen for sure.
So do you ever compare the medicine, the DMT, and do you ever have a favorite for you, or would you say that, or it's just different, each of
I,
them?
yeah, there are definitely a lot of variants from experience. I think I tier them. I think what I do is I tier psychedelics, and I put psilocybin and MDMA in kind of the tier one, where now I actually don't enjoy doing like hero doses of psilocybin. I've done plenty, and they can be very good for deep shadow work. They can bring you the lesson you need to get, but they can also be very intense and they're very long. But if I, with a partner, want to take like a small amount of psilocybin, watch a comedy, just connect. They have a growing reputation of being a very powerful aphrodisiac. That's certainly been my subjective experience, and many I hear about anecdotally. MDMA, the same thing. And that's not to say that these medicines should be taken like without any sort of like prep work, and I still journal, I still intention, I still do an integration after. But in like the tier one psychedelics, I have found them to be just an excellent modality of recreation. I abstain from alcohol. I haven't drank in over 6 years, and humans are pleasure seekers. And I think what gets lost in the conversation about the war on drugs and how to roll these medicines out is like, okay, why don't we start with just the principle of something that we know, which is an undeniable part of the human experience, is a desire for pleasure. Like I've never met anybody that's woken up and said, I don't want to experience any joy today. So, okay, if we have these safe medicines, certainly safer than the alternative of alcohol, which will here in the US create over 90,000 deaths a year. And that's a conservative estimate. That to me, where I kind of put those entry level psychedelics. And then there's this other level of DMT, Changa, Bufo, Samadhi, ayahuasca. I usually try not to, or I avoid the temptation to compare one to the other. That's a human thing, right? Like you land in Barcelona, you're like, oh, this reminds me of Rio. It's like, well, this is Barcelona. Maybe just treat it absolutely as opposed to relatively. But it's a human temptation I've certainly fallen guilty to. But I think this is where I would kind of say my takeaways. I think for me, Bufo 5-MeO DMT was incredible for healing past trauma. I think my bigger takeaway from samadhi, and it's been less than a year since that journey, so I'm still evolving from it. But I think samadhi, the experience and the takeaway is more about how I can kind of serve others. And one of my favorite comedians here in the States, Tim Dillon, had a good joke about ayahuasca. Like, ayahuasca doesn't care if you buy that car or not. Yet, I think the risk to the rise and ubiquity of these medicines is people are going to go have these experiences, and absent of doing like really deep integration work, they're just going to be like, ayahuasca told me to quit my job. It's like, well, maybe. I don't think she actually cares whether or not you quit your job. I think what she does care is like what kind of person you're going to be. And so I think in terms of trying to figure out like where I fit in this world, samadhi and DMT have done a really good job of kind of helping me calibrate, what exactly that is, what that looks like.
Oh, so many threads I want to tap into. So one of the things that I always say, you can tell me if you resonate with this. Not putting on a tier, but I always thought that they were different doors to the same place.
Mm.
Same place, meaning our essence, our internal landscape, because they bring us to ourselves, right? So, but the doorway can be different, and getting there can be a different experience or a process. So that's kind of how I started understanding them. And the other thing is, I remember a friend of ours participated in an ayahuasca retreat in Peru, and ended up giving away all the savings, material possessions, everything, just because the medicine was telling that you got to let go of your attachments and so on. And my advice is always like, don't do anything radical. Like, don't, until you integrate the experience really well, don't take action, like radical actions. And I know that people do. I hear stories that people move countries. They, close down businesses and sell businesses and completely quit their jobs and things like that. So there is this rule of thumb: you do not take radical action until you integrate your experience, right? Because the friend came back and completely regretted doing that in the moment, in the heat of that, really emotional connection, and thinking that this was the right thing to do. So there is that also, which as you said, I think giving it time, giving it a space, giving it a good, giving the space for a process and integrating it, and then really draw the lessons individually, because I think they also give each one of us a different message, what we need to bring alignment to our lives. For example, that being said, I wanted to ask you about, what are your thoughts of people quitting their jobs and then completely taking the psychedelic path?
Yeah, well, I mean, that hits home, since I did something somewhat similar. Yeah, I think that, I mean, what you're saying emphasizes the importance of integration. And if you just think of like the profile of someone who is going to muster the courage to fly to Peru and sit with ayahuasca, knowing that's going to be intense, and this isn't Club Med, it's not going to be all fun and games. That profile is someone that in the big five, almost, I can say with arrogant certitude, they're going to test high in openness to new experience. And oftentimes people that test high in openness to new experience, which I do, are overly porous to new ideas and revelations and mystical experiences, right? Which isn't to downplay the significance of mystical experiences. The few that I've had, to me, like, converted me from an atheist to a believer, and a skeptic to someone that's more open-minded. But there certainly is a risk to openness to new experience, being overly porous to new ideas, getting a profound lesson, and then not doing the homework after to integrate that into your life, and what that means, and the idea of letting go. I mean, it probably doesn't mean letting go of every dollar in your bank account. It might just mean like, letting go of an attachment style that's not serving you in your romantic relationships, or letting go of an obsessive desire to get promoted at work because you are playing a status game that you're unaware of, and you want to update your LinkedIn title so bad so everyone sees it. And letting go of that egoic desire because it's not serving you, versus letting go of everything you own. So yeah, to me, this just like really drives home the point of integration work, and taking time after any psychedelic experience. And I would even include my tier 1 psilocybin and MDMAs in this, of like really sitting with it. Like I have a journal with me almost nonstop. Almost every successful, intelligent person I know journals, and this only becomes increasingly important when you start going down the realm of psychedelic experiences. So yeah, I mean, if you don't, bad trips are the result of not setting a proper intention or one at all. And bad decisions post trip is the result of not doing the integration work. The experiences have to be bookended with those two things, or else you could be doing a lot more harm than good.
I agree. Very valuable. Thank you so much for saying that.
Sure.
I can't remember. I've forgotten now, but I used to remember it now. So I came across this concept. I can't remember who said this. Um, I think he was saying something like, how we want to quit our jobs and become a psychedelic, person, or kind of helping the Renaissance to flourish and, be part of this movement and so on. But he was saying something like along the lines of, it's not that we are immersing with the psychedelic medicines, but psychedelics are cultivating us. Like we're not cultivating psychedelics. It's the other way around. And that's because it has a spirit. These medicines have a spirit, and they want us to be aligned and be a good person, right? Be a good human for ourselves, for the environment, for the people, for the planet. So I laughed so hard when I heard that the psychedelics are cultivating us. It's not the other way around. And that's why I guess it's almost like if we really dedicate ourselves to work and commit and integrate and make it part of our lives, it's almost inevitable that we would kind of take the path of doing the work with psychedelic
Yeah.
medicines, right?
I have an anecdote that I think is very apropos to what you just shared, which was like one of the most, to this day, I remember how I felt upon this conversation because it was so powerful. I was down in Mexico, right? It was leading up to my samadhi journey. I was speaking to a friend of mine there who's a healer and a very aware, conscious person. And I asked him, like, I've been studying, these plants and, the toad and all, and I can't figure out a reason. And pollen, by the way, tries to explore this unsuccessfully, as we all are, in how to change your mind. Like, what would be the adaptation? What would be the evolutionary advantage for a plant to gift a human a mystical experience? Like, we're not a source of predation for a lot of these plants, and even if we were, temporarily disorienting your source of predation wouldn't be that's an ephemeral strategy, because we would just figure out, we would adapt for ways to block out that disorientation. And so I said, I asked him, point blank, like, why do these plants gift us these mystical experiences? And he said something I'll never forget to the day I die. He said, because they want to, feel what it's like to be human. And I thought that was so profound and so beautiful and so eloquent. And it makes sense. It's almost like this game of cosmic reciprocity where we get to experience their consciousness and all the beauty and the wonders that come with that. And they get to experience what it's like to have a human, to be in the human condition. And some things happened after my Bufo experience that really kind of validate what you're saying, where this increased level of serendipity. And if you talk to, healers, they'll say psychedelic experiences raise your vibrational energy. And I got within like 30 days of my last Bufo experience, my first Bufo experience rather, I got a promotion at work, one that I wasn't particularly deserving of. An ex-girlfriend came back into my life, old friends reached out to, all of these things that I couldn't attribute to mere coincidence and randomness and chance happened. And so sometimes, that's enough. That's in and of itself. You don't have to quit your job, leave your partner because you had an argument over who did the dishes. Like, don't throw the baby out the bathwater. Maybe just take all of these learnings, integrate the work, and become a better person. I think if more people have those type of experiences and do the work afterward, I mean, we really could create a better society.
I think so. And it reminds me of Dennis McKenna. He always says they tell you to just grow up and be a good person, right? Be a good human.
Yeah. Love Dennis. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, totally. Well, Andrew, what's the mission? What are your plans for going forward? Maybe.
Yeah, that's a good question, Susan. Like, I kind of adopt, he's British. I'm sure you're familiar with Alan Watts, or he was British. I love his philosophy. I started reading him just kind of randomly at the same time, I started going on a lot of psychedelic journeys, and his notion that like the purposeful life is a wasted life really resonated with me. I grew up very like structured, goals, discipline. Started my career on Wall Street, then moved to tech, lived in New York City. Everything was a status game, from how many doormen do you have to what promotion are you getting next to how many zeros in your W-2. And I lived that life for so long, and I can't, even if I try hard, I struggle to pull a positive, blissful, fun memory from that life, that existence. So I know this sounds like I don't know, like antithetical to what most people will tell you to do. I don't have a purpose. I don't have goals. I am just being in the human experience and loving my life as much as I can. And so I think in terms of like what I'm going to do, I think I have a pretty good ability to have these experiences and write about them, and also not just write about those experiences. I do that, of course, but take any topic, whether it's romantic relationships, culture, something happening in the world, editorialize it through my own psychedelic experiences and what these medicines have taught me, and tell these stories in a way that I think is pretty captivating. And so I'm going to continue to do that, and that'll lead me where it leads me.
I love that, living in the moment. I think, did you hear this term about psychedelic work? So people who really commit to this path. By the way, I just want to throw out a disclaimer, because this is not an easy path, as you can, from the way I hear you, and I speak to so many guests, and it's like what they see is just the tip of the iceberg, right? There is a whole lot has gone into this work. You're not just sitting here after 2 ceremonies. There's also been a leverage in your life, like you shared with us. There has been a significant loss in your life that I call that leverage, because sometimes those really deep painful experiences really shake our world. That becomes the leverage in us really seeking much deeper meaning in life. And I think a lot of people who come to these medicines, they always come through this deep need for seeking for meaning and understanding what just happened and why their lives have been just shaken. So it really, for me, it's very spiritual.
Yeah.
This path is very spiritual. And I remember, I spoke to Joel, obviously. He's a 5-MeO facilitator. And I asked him once, I said, I heard that the more intense the person is, the more intense their journey and their recovery and their healing and their seeking this meaning for life, the intense the medicine they carry. If that makes sense. So do you know what I mean? So the more intense your medicine is, the more intense journey you have been walking. And that's kind of like the way that I understand it. A lot of people that, like Iboga, for example, some of the guests that I speak to, I mean, for me, Iboga is really intense, right? It's known now that it's one of the really intense medicines. And people who facilitate Iboga, they usually have the most intense path that they have walked. It's almost like their capacity is so huge now they can hold such an intense medicine. So the reason I'm sharing this is as well the leverage, the leverage that we have that puts us on these paths. It's not easy. It's not for everyone. I know that medicines are not for everyone, but those that are really on this from the aligned, authentic intention, I know that they always end up learning and bringing it to the people, facilitating, and also in that journey, there is a lot of letting go, of letting go, organic letting go, a lot of rooting and letting go. I think this is a very profound time to be talking about this. It is a spiritual experience for me. This path is the ultimate spiritual dedication, commitment to the path. And I don't know what your thoughts about the spiritual aspect of the medicines, but would like to hear your perspective.
So much to unpack there. I love the idea of leverage. It's interesting. I don't know. It's unequivocally a spiritual pursuit that I'm now on and continue to be on. And I don't know if it was a quest for meaning. Like I'm trying to think of the genesis of this. I've now lost both my siblings, and I think I turned to psychedelics. I don't know if it's for meaning. I think I might reframe that a bit. Yeah, I think the great loss in life for me has resulted in a insatiable curiosity for what it is to have a human experience, what happens after we die, um, why are we here, all of these things. And to kind of tether it back to like Joelle's point about intensity, I've had really intense, it makes sense, I fit the profile. um, uh, and I've had really intense journeys on Bufo, on Samadhi, on DMT, on Changa. Yeah, they were beautiful in some ways, but I felt like during these experiences, I could both energetically communicate with my lost siblings, not in the way you and I are having a conversation right now, of course, but in terms of like presence and energy, feeling that. And I felt like it got me one step closer to understanding the nature of the human experience. And we'll never know. And I don't want to know. I don't want to live in a world where we get the answers to the test. I think the pursuit and this path of curiosity is so much fun. But so I don't know if I think I would agree with everything you just said, except I might substitute the word meaning with like curiosity. Like I think I've been like this since I was a little kid. I think I just probably annoyed my parents incessantly with like, why is this the way this is? Why am I alive? Well, how did this happen? And now this is kind of proliferated as an adult after a loss, in getting closer to understanding the nature of the human experience. To me, brings a ton of bliss and a ton of joy that I can then go package and spread out into the world, which is, yeah, I think is exclusively positive.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. I guess everybody, we all have a different, um, way that we come into it, I guess, right? So in a nutshell, that we do. Okay. So as we coming to end of our conversation, what I love asking is usually that, what would you like to share with our listeners? What would you like to leave them with? Anything that comes to your mind through your experience, through what you understand about the medicines?
Yeah. It's funny. We keep bringing them up, but in my last conversation with Joel and Victoria, I asked them somewhat a similar question about 5-MeO specifically, and their viewpoint was that everybody should do it at one point in their life when they're ready. And so I think my message to people, I remember I had a friend when I first started, and I love this because it was so authentic. Whereas most people, I think, when they articulate their reason as to why they don't do psychedelics, they speak from a place of ego, right? Like, I just don't have any interest, or I don't want to lose control. I remember I had a friend that told me, I wouldn't go into my own subconscious without a gun or a flashlight. I have no interest in unearthing whatever's down there. And listen, do I agree with that sentiment? Clearly not. I'm on a different path, but I loved the honesty of it. So what I would say to people who maybe they're feeling the medicine call them, and that can appear in our lives in a multitude of ways. But what I would say to them, the idea that you have control over your life is completely illusory. You don't make your heart beat. You can't predict the next thought that was coming into your mind. Even if you could predict that thought, you didn't choose the atoms and the neurons firing in your brain that catalyzed that thought. And so part of we train our children, we condition people to believe that they can control their lives. And that's just, you live in an environment you can't control, and you have a brain that's producing thoughts you can't control. And so get rid of the idea that you have any agency over your life whatsoever, because the reality is you don't. And if you really want to understand, or at least get closer to understanding what it means to be an actual human having a human experience, at some point in your life, have a mystical experience. And you can get there without psychedelics. There's some people, because they have schizophrenic conditions in their family, they shouldn't do psychedelics. You can get there. Stan Grof invented, I believe it was holotropic breath work, because he couldn't take LSD. And there's advanced meditators. You can achieve transcendence in other ways. I personally like psychedelics because they're fun and fast. But I think at some point, everyone in their life should have a mystical experience, but done in a way that they're safe, they're ready, they're older. I don't even think anyone in their 20s should be flirting with this idea. Just my take, because I think once the veil of control is lifted, we're then free to really live the lives we were meant to live.
That is very powerful. Thank you so much, Andrew.
Thank you for having me, Susan.
Yeah. Wow, it's been really meaningful and informative. Your perspective is very valuable, and thank you for contributing with your blog. So where can our listeners find you? if they're
Sure.
listening to this on audio, for example? Please tell us where can they find you?
Yeah, it's very simple. I publish every Friday. It's called the Psychedelic Blog on Substack. I'm also on YouTube, but Substack is where to follow me for weekly newsletters every single Friday. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Andrew. And would like to have you back. I'm sure you'll be on this path and then progressively, because it's a progressive path, right? It's like this infinite unfolding once we get on this path. And then it will be lovely to have you back to follow your journey. And this is what we love. We love having returning guests, and we wish you all the best.
I would love that. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Hope you guys enjoyed this conversation. Please do get in touch or comment below. Don't be shy. Share your experiences, ask questions, and engage. And I'll see you on the next one. Bye for now. Thank you so much for joining us. Psychedelic Conversations podcast is designed to educate, inform, and expand awareness. For more information, please head over to psychedelicconversations.com. You can also share with your friends or leave a review so that we can reach more people. You can also join us in our private Facebook group to keep the conversation going. This show is for information purposes only, and it is not intended to provide mental health or medical advice. Thanks for listening.